The amber glow of the old tavern's lanterns casts dancing shadows across weathered wooden tables, where the scent of aged whiskey mingles with the crisp autumn air drifting through half-open windows. Outside, the busy streets of downtown Boston hum with evening traffic, but inside this intimate corner establishment, time seems to move at a different pace. The walls are lined with leather-bound books, creating an atmosphere that feels more like a philosopher's study than a neighborhood bar. At a corner table, two figures sit across from each other, their conversation already drawing curious glances from nearby patrons. The first is a tall, angular man with intense eyes and unruly dark hair, Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher whose passionate gestures punctuate every word. Across from him sits David Hume, the Scottish thinker, smaller in stature but commanding in presence, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to his companion's animated energy. The bartender, a philosophy student working his way through graduate school, has been eavesdropping on their conversation for the past hour, occasionally pausing in his glass cleaning to catch particularly intriguing exchanges. "Do you know, David," Kierkegaard begins, leaning forward with the fervor of someone who has spent sleepless nights wrestling with existential questions, "I find it almost tragic how you reduce human experience to mere skeptical inquiry. Life isn't a laboratory experiment. It's a passionate journey that demands we leap beyond the comfortable boundaries of rational analysis." Hume chuckles softly, taking a measured sip of his scotch. His eyes twinkle with the kind of intellectual mischief that has made him famous for dismantling philosophical certainties. "Ah, Søren, but that's precisely the point. You speak of leaping, but where does that leave us? Suspended in mid-air, hoping our passionate convictions will somehow transform into solid ground beneath our feet." The warmth of the tavern seems to intensify the contrast between their worldviews. Kierkegaard's hands move expressively as he speaks, as if trying to capture something ineffable in the air between them. But that's exactly what faith is, my friend. It's the courage to embrace uncertainty, to choose meaning in the face of doubt. When I stand before the possibility of God's existence, rational proof becomes irrelevant. The question isn't whether I can demonstrate God's reality through logical arguments, but whether I'm willing to stake my entire existence on that possibility. "And there's the rub," Hume responds, his Scottish accent adding a melodic quality to his measured words. "You're asking people to make the most important decisions of their lives based on what amounts to wishful thinking. I've spent considerable time examining the nature of human belief, and what I've found is that our so-called rational faculties are far more limited than we'd like to admit. But that doesn't mean we should abandon reason altogether. It means we should be honest about its limitations and build our understanding on firmer ground." The conversation is interrupted momentarily as a group of young professionals at a nearby table erupts in laughter, their mundane concerns about work deadlines and weekend plans creating a surreal backdrop to this philosophical collision. The bartender catches Kierkegaard's eye and nods toward their empty glasses, but both men are too absorbed in their debate to notice. "Firmer ground?" Kierkegaard's voice rises slightly, drawing the attention of a couple at the bar. "David, your entire philosophical project demonstrates that there is no firm ground. You've shown us that causation is unprovable, that the self is nothing more than a bundle of perceptions, that induction is logically unjustifiable. You've demolished the very foundations of rational certainty, yet you still insist we should rely on reason rather than embrace the subjective truth that gives life meaning." Hume leans back in his chair, seemingly unperturbed by the passionate intensity of his companion's argument. "But that's precisely why I advocate for a kind of methodological skepticism. Yes, I've shown that pure reason has its limits, but that doesn't mean we should throw caution to the wind. Custom, habit, and natural belief, these are the guides that serve us well in practical life. We don't need absolute certainty to navigate the world effectively." The evening deepens around them, and the tavern's atmosphere grows more intimate as the crowd thins. Their debate has reached a crucial juncture, two brilliant minds representing fundamentally different approaches to humanity's deepest questions. As the night progresses, the philosophical tension between the two thinkers becomes more pronounced. Kierkegaard orders another drink, a dark beer that seems to match his brooding contemplation, while Hume continues nursing his scotch with characteristic patience. The bartender has given up any pretense of not listening, openly leaning against the bar to catch every word of their exchange. "Let me tell you about Abraham," Kierkegaard begins, his voice taking on the tone of someone sharing a deeply personal revelation. "Here's a man who receives a command from God to sacrifice his beloved son, Isaac. Every rational, ethical consideration screams against this action. Society would condemn him, morality would revolt, logic would demand he seek psychiatric help. Yet Abraham prepares to obey, not because he can rationalize God's command, but because he makes a leap of faith beyond the universal principles of ethics. Hume raises an eyebrow, his expression one of polite but firm disagreement. And you see this as admirable. Sir, and what you're describing sounds dangerously close to fanaticism. If we allow people to override reason and morality in the name of personal religious conviction, where does that lead us? Throughout history, the most heinous acts have been committed by individuals who claimed divine inspiration. But you're missing the crucial distinction, Kierkegaard responds, his intensity growing. Abraham's situation represents the paradox of faith. It's not about abandoning all moral consideration, but about recognizing that there are dimensions of human existence that transcend rational analysis. The knight of faith doesn't reject ethics. He moves beyond it into a realm where individual relationship with the divine takes precedence over universal moral laws. The ambient noise of the tavern, clinking glasses, muffled conversations, the occasional burst of laughter, creates a strange counterpoint to their weighty discussion. A couple at a nearby table is having an animated conversation about their relationship problems, their concerns about trust and commitment, echoing themes that both philosophers are exploring on a much deeper level. Hume leans forward, his calm demeanor masking the sharp precision of his intellectual attack. But how do we distinguish between genuine divine inspiration and self-delusion? You're essentially arguing that subjective experience should trump objective evidence. But human psychology is notoriously unreliable. We know that people can convince themselves of almost anything if they want to believe it badly enough. That's exactly the point, David. Kierkegaard's voice carries a note of excitement, as if Hume has inadvertently strengthened his argument. Faith isn't about certainty. It's about passionate commitment in the face of uncertainty. When I choose to believe in God, I'm not claiming to have solved some intellectual puzzle. I'm making an existential commitment that transforms my entire way of being in the world. But transformation isn't necessarily improvement, Hume counters smoothly. People have been transformed by all sorts of beliefs throughout history, some beneficial, others catastrophic. Without some external standard for evaluation, how do we judge whether a particular transformation represents progress or regression? The question hangs in the air between them like smoke from an extinguished candle. Around them, the tavern continues its evening rhythm, servers weaving between tables, the soft jazz playing from hidden speakers, the gentle murmur of conversations about everything from politics to sports to romance. Yet their corner has become a bubble of philosophical intensity that seems separate from the mundane concerns of ordinary life. Kierkegaard takes a long drink, then sets his glass down with deliberate care. You're asking for objective criteria to judge subjective experience, which is like asking someone to prove they're in love through mathematical equations. Some truths can only be lived, not demonstrated. When I speak of the leap of faith, I'm talking about the courage to embrace paradox, to live authentically in the face of ultimate questions that have no final answers. And yet, Hume responds, his voice carrying the weight of years spent examining human nature, we must live in the world as it is, not as we might wish it to be. My approach isn't about abandoning meaning or purpose. It's about finding workable solutions based on human nature as we actually observe it, rather than as we might ideally conceive it. The debate has revealed something fundamental about their different temperaments and approaches to philosophy, setting the stage for an even deeper exploration of their contrasting worldviews. The tavern has grown quieter now, with only a handful of patrons scattered across the dimly lit space. The philosophical debate between Kierkegaard and Hume has reached a new level of intensity, their conversation drawing the occasional curious glance from the remaining customers. The bartender has long since abandoned any pretense of working, standing openly at the end of the bar with a dish rag in his hands, completely absorbed in their exchange. David, Kierkegaard begins, his voice carrying a tone of genuine curiosity mixed with challenge, you've built your entire philosophical reputation on demonstrating the limits of human reason. You've shown us that we can't prove causation, that induction is logically unjustifiable, that the existence of the external world is uncertain, yet somehow you still insist that reason should be our primary guide. Isn't that a contradiction? Hume chuckles, a sound that carries both amusement and deep philosophical satisfaction. Not at all, my friend. What I've done is clear away the philosophical debris that has accumulated over centuries of metaphysical speculation. Yes, pure reason has its limits, but that doesn't mean we should abandon rational inquiry altogether. It means we should be honest about what reason can and cannot accomplish. But that honesty leads to a kind of philosophical paralysis, Kierkegaard responds, his gestures becoming more animated. If we can't trust our senses, if we can't establish causal connections, if we can't even prove our own existence with certainty, then what foundation is left for human action? You've created a skeptical abyss that swallows up everything meaningful. The soft jazz playing in the background seems to underscore the existential weight of their discussion. A young couple at a corner table is deep in conversation about their future together, their hands intertwined as they plan a life based on hopes and commitments that, by Hume's analysis, have no rational foundation. Yet they proceed with confidence, guided by something beyond logical demonstration. That's where you misunderstand my position, Hume explains, leaning back in his chair with the relaxed confidence of someone who has spent decades refining his arguments. I don't advocate for paralysis, quite the opposite. I argue for a kind of practical naturalism. We are creatures of custom and habit, shaped by experience and guided by sentiment. These natural tendencies serve us far better than abstract reasoning when it comes to navigating daily life. But sentiment can be wrong, Kierkegaard interjects, his eyes flashing with intellectual passion. Human feelings are notoriously unreliable. One day we feel love, the next day indifference. One moment we're confident, the next we're filled with doubt. If we base our lives on such shifting foundations, aren't we essentially admitting that human existence is meaningless? Hume takes a thoughtful sip of his scotch before responding. Not meaningless, just different from what we might have hoped. Consider the question of moral judgment. I've argued that moral sentiments arise from human sympathy and social utility, not from abstract rational principles. This doesn't make morality meaningless, it makes it human. Our moral intuitions have evolved because they serve important social functions. And what about the individual? Kierkegaard's voice carries a note of urgency now. What about the person who finds themselves in conflict with social utility? What about someone whose deepest convictions run counter to the prevailing moral sentiments of their community? Are they simply wrong because they deviate from the herd? The question touches on something fundamental about human existence, the tension between individual authenticity and social conformity. Around them, the tavern's remaining patrons seem like representatives of the very social conformity Kierkegaard is questioning, people following conventional patterns, seeking comfort in shared assumptions, rarely questioning the foundations of their beliefs. That's a fair challenge, Hume acknowledges, his respect for Kierkegaard's intellectual rigor evident in his tone. But even individual rebellion requires some foundation for evaluation. How do we distinguish between legitimate moral insight and mere eccentricity or self-delusion? Your approach seems to valorize subjective conviction, regardless of its content or consequences. Because there is no external standard, Kierkegaard responds with passionate intensity. That's exactly what makes human existence so profound and terrifying. We are condemned to choose, to commit, to take responsibility for our choices without the comfort of objective justification. The individual standing before God, or before the ultimate questions of existence, cannot appeal to universal principles or social consensus. They must choose, and in choosing, they define who they are. The weight of this realization seems to settle over their table like a physical presence. They have reached the heart of their disagreement, not just about faith versus reason, but about the fundamental nature of human existence and the source of meaning in a universe that offers no easy answers. The tavern has reached its quietest hour, with only a few dedicated drinkers and late-night philosophers remaining. The bartender has dimmed the lights further, creating an atmosphere of intimate contemplation that seems perfectly suited to the depth of the conversation unfolding between Kierkegaard and Hume. Their debate has evolved beyond abstract philosophical positions to something more personal and urgent. Let me share something with you, David, Kierkegaard begins, his voice taking on a more vulnerable quality. I've lived my entire adult life wrestling with the question of faith. Not the comfortable, socially acceptable faith of conventional Christianity, but the terrifying, lonely faith of the individual who stands before ultimate questions without the support of rational proof or social validation. Hume listens intently, recognizing the shift in their conversation toward something more personally revelatory. Tell me about that experience, Søren. What does it feel like to base one's life on such uncertain foundations? It feels like standing on the edge of a cliff, Kierkegaard responds, his eyes distant as if recalling moments of profound spiritual struggle. Every morning I wake up and must choose again whether to make the leap of faith. It's not a decision made once and forgotten. It's a daily recommitment to live as if my deepest convictions are true. even when doubt gnaws at the edges of my consciousness. The honesty of this admission seems to soften something in Hume's demeanor. I can respect that kind of existential courage even if I can't share it, but surely you must see the dangers in such an approach. History is littered with individuals who claim divine inspiration for their actions, often with catastrophic results. Of course I see the dangers, Kierkegaard acknowledges, but I also see the danger in your approach, the risk of reducing human existence to a series of habits and customs, of treating our deepest longings and highest aspirations as mere psychological curiosities. When you analyze away mystery, when you explain away transcendence, what's left of human dignity? A drunk patron at the bar starts singing softly to himself an old ballad about lost love and redemption. The irony isn't lost on either philosopher. Here's someone expressing through song the kind of passionate commitment to meaning that their debate has been exploring through abstract argument. Human dignity doesn't require mystery, Hume responds thoughtfully. It can be found in our capacity for reason, in our ability to form meaningful relationships, in our potential for moral improvement through education and social reform. We don't need to postulate divine commandments to appreciate the wonder of human achievement. But that's exactly where we differ fundamentally, Kierkegaard says, leaning forward with renewed intensity. You see human nature as essentially complete, capable of improvement through better understanding and social organization. I see human nature as essentially incomplete, requiring a leap beyond itself to achieve authentic existence. The anxiety I feel when confronting ultimate questions isn't a problem to be solved. It's a call to transformation. The philosophical chasm between them has never been clearer. Hume represents the Enlightenment confidence in human reason and gradual progress, while Kierkegaard embodies the romantic insistence on individual authenticity and spiritual transcendence. Yet their conversation continues because each recognizes something valuable in the other's perspective. Consider this scenario, Hume proposes, his analytical mind searching for common ground. Suppose we accept that human reason has significant limitations and that social customs provide only approximate guidance for human behavior. Couldn't we then acknowledge a role for what you call faith, while still maintaining critical standards for evaluating different faith commitments? Kierkegaard shakes his head slowly. You're still trying to domesticate faith, to make it safe and reasonable. But genuine faith is precisely what cannot be domesticated. It's the recognition that some choices transcend rational evaluation, that some commitments require us to venture beyond the boundaries of what can be justified through argument or evidence. And yet, Hume persists, we must live together in society. We must make collective decisions about justice, education, governance. If everyone follows their private inspiration, how do we maintain social cohesion? That's the tragic beauty of human existence, Kierkegaard responds, his voice carrying both sadness and exhilaration. We are simultaneously individuals and members of society, both authentic selves and social beings. The tension between these roles cannot be resolved through philosophical argument. It must be lived, with all the anxiety and uncertainty that entails. Their conversation has revealed not just philosophical differences, but fundamentally different temperaments and approaches to the human condition. As the night deepens around them, both men seem to recognize that their debate has reached a point where further argument might be less important than mutual understanding and respect. The stage is set for their final exchange, where each will offer his ultimate vision of how humans should navigate the fundamental challenges of existence.